Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. So this is always fun when recording lectures because um, I'm kind of treating this like a normal lecture, not a YouTube video stream type of thing. But I had a little bit of fun this morning, so I just recorded pretty much the majority of our intro to Rails, what I'm going to be talking about here. Except I forgot to change the screen that was being recorded to my content. So I just lost probably, 20 minutes of video. And yeah, I'm not going to edit and splice through things. So let's just re-record. But it's that kind of day. Anyway, what we're going over today, and I'm going to click that button. There we go. Look at that. We're going to be dipping into Rails a little bit more, and basically we're going to be looking at more of the internals, and you're still going to get kind of the high-level overview of what you can do with Rails, because we're going to be hopping around from technology to technology in here. We'll spend more time with Rails than pretty much anything else, but also what we're going to go over today is PHP, which is a server-side scripting language. We'll get into that a little bit. Again, if you've seen any of the programming humor jokes on the internet, they always make fun of PHP for some reason, but honestly, it's a perfectly fine language, and it's honestly one of my favorites, which tells you a lot about me, I guess. We're also going to be looking at Flask Touch as well. So this is a Python-based MVC framework, very similar to Rails, except it's a lot less feature-rich in terms of what you can do on the terminal. It's a lot more kind of like you have to do all the heavy lifting with Flask, whereas Rails is going to automatically generate everything for you. We'll get into that though. I also have a link here to a different Rails presentation. This is quite old now, but it was a nice little overview of Rails, at least as of I think 2008, but might be worth the check if you're looking for more information as well. So today, Rails, Flask, and PHP. And this is going to be split up probably amongst 3 or 4 videos would be my guess. So with Rails, we have looked at the basics so far. We did that Rails new blog command and we generated a page. We got something that kind of looks like this, right? I hopefully talked about that in the last one. And basically, default route to the homepage, simple application, easy enough. Now, what we're going to be going into today is a little bit more on the bits and pieces of Rails. So we have routing, we have models, views, controllers, all these pieces of the MVC framework that are going to work very nicely together to give us a very feature-rich application. And one other thing I'd like to mention too is that I have a former student from one of my system administration, well, 2 of my system administration classes from several years back, who's running a YouTube channel where he basically dives into Rails and a whole bunch of different topics and Ruby as well. And it's honestly a very good and in-depth series. So if you want more details, definitely check out Dean's channel because it's good stuff. So let's talk MVC. Now, last time I brought up the fact that basically it is a nice design pattern if you have big teams, if you have big complicated websites. Maybe the overhead's a little bit too much if you're doing something simple, but honestly, it's a really good pattern to learn. So the actual flow for Rails here is going to look something like this. We start with the browser, all right, and then the user is going to put in a URL to your website. So it's going to be gvsu.edu/courses/CIS658 or something like that. I don't think that's the actual link to our course description. But basically, we have a URL. It's going to be parsed out by the browser, sent to the web server. The web server is going to say, oh, this is a Rails port. Let's, send that to the Rails application. Rails is then going to parse out the individual URL components and figure out, okay, how do we route this thing internally? So if we have, this kind of this flow here, and let's go back to this. So this is my default route for this web page, right? So it's port 8080. Hopefully we did that last time, but I am telling, let's see, where's it at? I'm telling Rails to run on port 8080, and we did this again before where we have to specify, okay, this is the IP address for our host, and this is the port we're running on. Default route, we're not adding anything after that. If I were to add, and I did this offline /classes, and this was honestly part of my getting demos working for today, but we'll use it to talk through MVC. I'm going to add on the slash classes. All right, and this takes me to the route for the classes. Now I generated a separate controller, a set of different views, and basically I have a different page. And from the user's perspective, they just put in a different URL. And from Rails's perspective, I would have, again, different routes put into my application. I might put hyperlinks in, I might put buttons in that just routes users to different URLs inside the app. All right, and here we basically have, this is the default view template, so you can see, find me in app views classes index.html.erb. The controller that I created is called classes because I was going to list out all the classes. And then I realized later on, hey, the word class kind of conflicts with a built-in variable type, so it's not really smart for me to do. You know, when you try to say this is a class, that conflicts with the keyword. In this here, so this courses list that you see, this is coming from a model that I generated of all the courses that are going to be hosted on my webpage. There's only one for this, just it's a simple demo. But this is coming from a model, so this is a variable I'm injecting, separate route, separate controller, separate view, all kind of works nicely in here. Now, we get our URL here, and we're going to have any parameters we need, maybe identifiers, maybe strings, whatever it's going to be passed in through the URL. That's going to be parsed out and sent to whatever controller it relates to. You can have more than one controller in a Rails application. You could have a single massive godlike controller that does everything, which if you've had me for software engineering, that's the God pattern, and we try to avoid doing that. But, sorry, God anti-pattern. Regardless, the route's going to go to a controller. The controller is going to figure out, okay, this is coming from the classes route. So I'm going to pull whatever model is specified for this controller to get data specific to this controller. In this case, it's a list of courses. So depending on your application, you may or may not need this part. Okay, so by default, you're getting an SQLite database built into your application. You can use MySQL, you can use Postgres, you can go out and use Mongo or CouchDB or whatever database engine you want, but not always strictly required. Our model might just be internal data that we have stored as constants or something of that nature. It really is up to you what you want. So regardless, the controller is going to see, hey, do we need data for this particular route? If I have a course, is it going to have an ID? So for instance, I've got my classes here, and I'm going to add on a /658, and this is going to take me to yet another view where this is not really doing anything. It's just taking whatever this ID is and spitting it out as a header tag. I could say, hello, CIS658, and nicely browsers kind of parse out spaces that didn't used to always be that way. And it's just being directly injected there. It's kind of maybe a good stopping point for a quick little security lecture. What I'm doing here is terrible from a security perspective, and I want you to be aware of that. So anything I type up here is just going to go directly into my application. But what if I did something like this? Drop everything from users. I don't honestly remember my SQL syntax without a refresher. This is just kind of off the cuff. But hey, this just got directly injected. And if I was, say, taking user input from here, parsing it out in my controller and just throwing it at my model, I might encounter, okay, well, let's break the current SQL statement and then drop everything from the users table. Depending on if we have lazy permission set up, this might kill something in production, which you don't want. But anyway, parse out and always sanitize your inputs if you're going to handle it. A bit of a diversion there. So what happened was the controller is talking to a model. That model talks to a database if it needs to. We'll return data to the controller. This is going to come in as a variable or an array. So then the controller is going to figure out, okay, based on this route, which view do we render? All right, and this is either a typo or slightly out of date, but our views are going to be .erb, not .rb. and you actually will see this if I pull this up. Stop this for a sec. ls app views and classes. Make sure that's on screen. So you see this index is actually .erb. This is basically just telling Rails that this is a template file for HTML. Yeah, let's get our server back up and running. Okay, you've seen several views in this little demo here too. This is one view. This is another view. This is another view. In terms of adding new pages to my application, all I have to do is add a new view and tell the controller where to look for it, what it's called. It's really kind of easily extensible once you get the basics up and running, right? The initial learning curve for Rails and MVC in general is pretty steep, right? I mean, it's this big framework that you have to figure out, okay, how do I configure it? What goes where? I've got how many config files to look through and edit? Ugh. But once you get that up and running, adding new things is just so fast. And contrast that with what you've done so far in terms of web applications. So you have set up virtual hosts, you've set up multiple sites, multiple folders, and if I wanted, say, 3 different web applications, it could be, you have to know a little bit about Apache, have to know how to set things up, permissions, all that fun stuff. Rails, it's going to automatically generate a lot of this for us. And if you like Ruby, that's an even bigger plus. I'm still on the fence if I like Ruby or not. One other one other thing about this controller is this is going to be a class. So in the Intro to Ruby material that I provided for you, there is a little section on classes. I would definitely revisit that if you kind of skipped over it because your controllers are all class based. So to wrap this up here, we send a URL in, router picks it up, dispatches to a controller, controller will get data as necessary, controller will grab the relevant view, return that to the browser, you get a rendered page that looks like whatever you define it to be, okay? So this, let's see, 12 minutes, getting a little bit long here. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is we'll finish up with this folder structure, and then the next video will be kind of a working demo. Probably the next 2 videos will be working demos of getting some of the pieces set up. So it's kind of important to understand the folder structure for a Rails application. Now, if I stop this and I look inside here, okay, I see a gem file, readme, rake file, some folders, config, and some more folders. All right. And as I've mentioned, MVC is a configurable framework. So we have to understand where everything resides in this application. And do you need to use every single one of these things right away? Absolutely not. But you should understand what their purpose is. All right. So I've got the things highlighted in green that you're most likely going to be using in this class, more or less. We may or may not get to some other things, just kind of depends on how things go. And I've got a couple of links here that talk through the directory structure in different ways. You're going to come to know and love this Getting Started guide if you haven't already. And this is another one here too. So the app folder, this is going to be pretty much every application-specific file that you're going to work on. And I've shown you this a touch already, right? So if we look in app, we see our controllers, models, views. If we want to do mail, if we have any jobs, helper codes, assets, those are more like static things, but it's all going to be in here. And honestly, for the purposes of some of our demos, we're mainly going to look at controllers, models, and views. And if we look in app controllers, here are all the controllers that I have either created or have been automatically generated for me just by merit of creating a new application. And we see there Ruby files. Actually, while I'm here, let's take a look at classes controller. Sorry, Vim, app controllers, class controller. You see here, again, this is a Ruby class. And I've got an index and I've got a show handler in here. Now, what's going on in this controller, and we'll get into controllers in a little bit, this is handling the home page. This is handling anytime a route tells me to show data. I have a call to render index, render new view. This is telling Rails that for the index route, we get into our controller, okay, I need the index view. Makes sense. But here, for show, I need new view. And if we look in the views folder, we'll see the view that I called new view. Not very creatively named. Okay, so the other one. So bin, this is going to be all your binaries, right? In all the demos, it's been bin/rails to launch the server. So basically, this is where our application files are going to be. We look inside bin. So here's Rails. We also have bundle. So if we need to bundle things up, rake we'll probably get to later, and a few other things that we need. Config files. This is one of the important ones. So if we look inside config, we see some Ruby files and some YAML files. This is basically tweaking parameters for our application. So if we were to say look at database.yaml, okay, the default database is SQLite. We have a 5,000, I assume 5,000 second timeout. Where's our development database? Where's our test database? Where's our production database? Okay. One might think, hey, if I want to use MySQL, I probably have to configure my database.yaml file. And you'd be right. You'd have to change things in here. But we'll get to those as we need, basically. All right, so if we have databases, there's the DB folder. Hey, boom, there's our development SQLite database. If we wanted to put that in the command line, it's right there. Libraries, log files, good things to know about. If you ever have anything go wrong, you might want to check the log directory. So if we were to say cat log development.log, this is just going to dump everything that we see terminal side for an application. So here, just for funsies, I wasn't planning on talking about this, so and a little bit longer than I expected. Here is the call when I decided to drop everything from our users database. I have all of the data here for this interaction, and you would see this for every interaction with your Rails application, right? Libraries that are needed, public, this is where static files are going to go, so there's nothing really too crazy in my public directory that I've added. We see a default 404 page, default 500 page. So if you want to add in like custom views or custom pages if something goes wrong, like if you want something other than the default 404 page, or if you want to update your fave icon, which is the little icon for your browser, how you're handling robots, how you're handling basically the scripts. So, all of the static assets, you probably would put images or things of that nature in here as well. All right, and then we've got some storage. So cloud storage, I'm not sure how deep we'll get into this, but if you're using Rails for active storage, this is if you're talking to Azure or AWS or something like that. Testing, hopefully we'll get to, but this is where we put our unit tests and temp files, external libraries. But again, understand the purpose of these folders because it will save you time trying to hunt down bugs. Okay, that's enough for this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.